Yeah.
So one of the essays the Cut published this year that kind of electric shocked the internet was The Case for Marrying an Older Man by Grazie Sophia Christie, in which the author argues that young women should kind of capitalize on their youth and beauty while they have it. In her case, in her 20s, when she snuck into a party, I believe at HBS, to pick up her man who was 10 years older. So you should use their youth and beauty when they have it to pick up a well-off partner who can be like a mentor for them in life. And she makes this case for ease. It allows her to have the access to write as she does now. What does this reflect to you? Or like, why did this story resonate?
It resonated with me because honestly, I think that people would initially write about that from a place of feeling judgment and shame. And I really feel like actually a lot of people identified with the fact that life is expensive, but also just being honest with your desires and not having any shame around if you want to be a writer and you don't come from wealth, then what is the path to that? I think it was one of those pieces that I saw so many people sharing and privately having conversations and then coming back to us and saying, because they were embarrassed to talk about their own feelings about it, but agreed with a lot of the things that she said. But I think that we're always coming from a place of I'm pro women living exactly the kind of life that they want to live. And I would never judge or tell another woman how to live their life. But also I'm very invested in the decisions that we make and how that affects the trajectory of your life as a woman.
Another essay that kind of hit a chord, or a couple of essays, were on this topic of divorce. You had Molly Rosen's Happily Ever Divorced feature last year, and then Emily Gold's Should I Leave My Husband? The Lure of Divorce. Spoiler alert, she doesn't in the end.
Poor Keith.
But it gave you like the sense of the fantasy of separation. And in the case of Molly, the joy of separation, which I think really resonated because I think some of the happiest people I know are people who are divorced with children and then are kind of having a romantic life with a new partner. So what did that piece say to you? Why do you want to run that?
The relationship stuff, I mean, obviously we've done a ton of that. So that wasn't anything necessarily is new for assigning, but we've done a lot around divorce and relationships. And we saw a shift in just the tone in that during the pandemic and post-pandemic of how people were actually taking the time and the space to have real conversations around the pros and cons. And I remember talking with Emily and telling her, like, we should just do like an actual list, a graphic of you doing like the pros and the cons of the things that you listed through. But I think that there is a level of contemplation that goes into a lot of these things that most people, when they write an essay about it, it is just very straight. And it required, I think, to me, just a spectrum of emotions that you go through when you are deciding such a big life decision. I think what's also so interesting is when people like give me notes on personal essays and tell me, somebody else has written a divorce essay, but that one wasn't as good. It's often, I think, that it's just too trying to get straight to a point and deciding, whereas like that's not the reality of your life. You can say today that you feel this way, but then next year completely rebrand and decide to be a different new person.
And you always have the Excel sheet that you can refer back to with the pros and cons. So you can decide. Poor Keith. Another one was, we went from hot girl summer to a summer without sex this year.
Yeah.
Celibacy is all the rage right now. This has been a big topic of conversation, not just with you, but with the Bumble advertising campaign. Kelsey Osgood wrote this piece for you guys. What do you think the power of celibacy or boy sobriety movement, which seems to be in the culture right now? I see it around a lot of women in their 30s. What do you think is going on there?
I mean, Angelina Chapin, she just did a big piece for us last month that was everywhere around, is dating a total nightmare for you right now?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for me, it's always, a lot of those conversations traditionally felt like this is just something happening that's too lowbrow for us to try to report. And a big thing for me at The Cut has always been, we want to be the thing that you're sharing with your friends. We want to be the thing in your group chats. And that was immediately something that I was like, there's a sense of despair around dating right now that is very different. Obviously, up to the election, we're leading up to a place where I think people are just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And in the opposite place of the divorce stuff, I just saw a very clear pipeline of people talking about divorce and dating and celibacy in succession. And so I think a lot of that for me was us figuring out a way to elevate the conversation, but also do some reporting around it. So it isn't just a lot of these, yes, we do the personal essays, but we do a lot of service. We do a lot of reporting. So it isn't just one note.
Sounds tough out there.
Ben's just happy because he's been married since he was like in his early 20s. He got married young.
Most of what I read in the cut these days reaffirms that decision.
I think it's also, engagement for the cut is really important to me. So I'm constantly looking at the comments, especially on social. And so I'm always looking at like, what are the things that people want to really discuss, but also how can we be part of that conversation and create community around it? And I think also some fun. I think like a big part of the cut is that we have humor and energy and a little bit of attitude. And so it's a mix of a lot of different things. But in the midst of that, like we just did our Smut and Romance Week. The romance books are the number one sellers for publishers right now. And so I wanted to celebrate that because I found, a common thread in all of this was like, yes, there's a lot of single people and a lot of people complaining about dating, a lot of people talking about celibacy, but there is also this huge industry now around romance books. And I mean, Emily Henry's books just got picked up to do 5 different, I think, Netflix or some kind of films. And, so we did a big week on that as well.
Isn't that part of like defining for our culture and maybe even our politics right now, which is like the fantasy is better than the reality in almost 100%. Everything. And that's so much of what you're writing. But that comes back to this idea of the political question that Ben was asking before. I mean, you're like defining in the kind of, there is no cut woman the way there was this Cosmo woman, but there you can attract and marry rich dudes, you can live a soft life, you can be a trad wife, you can homestead, you can be a polyamorist, you can, play with celibacy or boy sobriety, you can have a lavender marriage with your gay best friend, all these different types of women, but aren't they all responding to the same political and social problem, which is this problem of women can't have it all, which is this problem of like society has put us in this place, had these expectations. And there's kind of 2 competing worldviews right now. One is kind of crystallized in this Project 2025 conservative Harrison Butker view of the world, which is like your life will begin when you are a mother and a wife. And, and by the way, I don't want to say it in a judgy way because I also come from a culture where being a wife and a mother has like a value to it. Caregiving has a value to it, both for your children, but also for your elders. And I think that is represented in this kind of conservative viewpoint. And then on the left, you see this kind of polyamory and this kind of communal living, which is saying, hey, we want to do these things. We want to have homes. We want to have a family. We want to make rent. But one person can't do it alone. 2 people can't figure it out. So like, we're going to build a community and social infrastructure that government didn't give us.
Yeah, I think both ends are really important. And I think but that's indicative of the cut. Like we're not just one note. And I think a lot of these lanes that you're speaking of, traditionally publications only thought these are the only topics that women want to have. As far as if it's fashion, it's got to be shiny. If it's relationships, it's just a sex column. If it's, it was very checking a box, where I think that we found a lot of these things on the spectrum of, you may want a relationship or you may not. You may want to have a hot girl summer or you may have a boy sober summer. Like there's levels to each of these things that I think we always want to play into, but it's also, we're not looking at it as trends. I think these are all conversations that we're all having with our communities, but also we're never too high up in thinking that we need to tell people how to live their life. No.
I mean, I do think of the cut historically and kind of where it comes from is basically kind of progressive in its politics. But actually, I think a lot of your most read stuff and a lot of the things I was just talking about are really conservative and are really talking about a return to, trad wife is the caricature of it, but to much more traditional gender roles in a way that, I don't know, it's probably embodied by Donald Trump in certain ways. And I'm curious, like, it feels like there's some cultural shift happening there that I'm myself trying to figure out how to navigate. I'm curious how you think about it.
I mean, yeah, I think that obviously it's really important for my team to be progressive, but also just inclusive in tone and voice. I think that is indicative of the kind of publication that I've always wanted to make. The kind of publication I always wanted to read was one that wasn't leaving me out of the equation as a young Black girl from the Midwest, right? So like, I think that that's always the goal. But I do think that honestly, the thing that I'm trying to solve with a lot of the politics is we write so much of it that people just don't want to read, and trying to figure out how to get them to be part of it. I mean, we wrote about Project 2025 today. We write about abortion stuff every single day. Like a lot of the politics, just straight politics things, I think people are feeling already an exhaustion around.
But do you feel like on gender roles specifically, do you feel like you're sort of feeling or feeding a shift to the right or shift sort of backward toward more traditional roles?
No, I don't.
I think that's like, it's almost a trap, Ben. Like I want to jump in for Lindsay a little bit. I would say it was a bit of a vibe shift.
It was a trap, sorry.
Men always trying to be trapping us here. So it's like a vibe shift that went from hype beast and woke to kind of this post-political, I think there was this expectation as a woman, and I certainly felt it, like growing up on Sex and the City and like graduating into the Sheryl
Yeah.
Sandberg era and all this stuff. But there was a sense that you couldn't, like when Harrison Butker said that thing, that quiet thing, you're like, oh, I can't feel like maybe he's on to something, even if he's the absolute worst poster child for the message. But I think that's what the cut is doing. But don't you think, Lindsay, it pisses off some of your progressive readers? Like that Marry the Older Man piece, there were a lot of parodies and people kind of attacking the writer and her name and her excessive use of commas and, and the mention of of Lolita.
Yeah, I think that there's always going to be people that dislike some of the takes that we put out, but I'm careful in curating what kinds of takes because I'm not trying to lift up a voice because I think that people will hate it. I'm lifting up a voice because I think that she had something important to say about the world in which we live in. And I do think that her experience is no better than an opposite experience. And that's honestly, to me, that's the importance of it. But I don't think that, we're never trying to elevate one or the other. It is always a balance game for sure.
Do you think you're bringing the men along, Lindsay?
I think we are. It's kind of strange because that was unexpected, but I think we are.
Are you getting more male subscribers to the cut?
I mean, I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but I do hear a lot more men talking about the issue. We're doing a lot more men in our upcoming September issue than we have before. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. It's important to me to see myself in the cut, so I really appreciate that.
I mean, Lindsay did say they were striving for an inclusive magazine, Ben. And we want to make sure you're included.
We totally are.
Do you think that the cut, part of what we talk a lot about on the show a bit is this idea, like, is media the invisible hand or is media just a mirror? And do you think that the cut is reflecting the culture or do you think you're shaping it?
A bit of both. Bit of both.
Give me a percentage, like 60-40, which way?
No, honestly, I would say,
Lindsay.
No, I think
do the girl math.
No, it's not girl math. I think it's maybe 60-40. I think that a lot of it is, we'll notice, I'll be reading something and I'll just notice a sentence that I'm like, I don't even think that they realize, but there's a nugget in there of something that I think we should chase after. And sometimes it's not, it's not always like the most magical thing that someone said, but it's usually in the way that they said it that I'm picking up on that there's something there that we need to dig further. When we are kind of trying to anticipate what it is, it's usually we're anticipating it that it's going to be bigger than what other people are thinking. And so we're kind of trying to beat that moment. But I only hesitate with that one because it really doesn't come from a place of arrogance. It comes from a place of, we know this is going to be something that you love and that you're going to want to devour. And how can we be with you in that moment when you're ready?
Yeah, what you're describing is like having your finger on the pulse and seeing where things are headed. Like, it's kind of like, is it in fashion? Like, are you choosing what style of jeans we're wearing, or you're just you're noticing that people are no longer going to be wearing these jeans and you're telling us?
Yeah. But I think sometimes we do choose. I notice a lot of people are wearing capris right now. I don't want to write about capris because I don't think that they look good and I don't want people to bring them back.
Yeah, they're not good. Don't bring capris.
Wow, thumb on the scale there.
Do not wear capris, Ben. Okay.
No threat of that.
But we offer a lot of other things that we're like, this is going to be the next thing when you're tired of these and you realize that these were a bad mistake. This is going to be the next thing. So
on the vibe shift, where do you notice it going? Because, that original piece from Allison where she had spoken to Sean Monahan about the kind of vibe shifts that he had been observing. And he had these 4 to 6 year periods. I'm going to forget what they were.
It was the hipster indie period, then the internet techno period, followed by the hype beast woke period. And I guess then the question just is, what's next?
Yeah, what's next?
I mean, honestly, we're planning a lot of this for our September issue, and I still haven't had landed on what I really want it to be. I think that there's like I just sense like a heavy exhaustion with a lot of our readers because I think so much is happening in the world, and how do we provide some relief from that, but also what are the areas of release that we can give them, whether it is a funny moment, but also then pushing them to understand that there's some important conversations that we have to have with them or that we want them to participate in. And so, that's honestly the one that I'm noticing right now.
Yeah, I mean, is it just pure escapism?
A little bit, but I think, it's fair because I do think that there's so much heavy in the world right now that I understand. I mean, and I think that was a lot of the reason why the smut and romance books are doing so well, because it takes you to another destination, another place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
smut, AI. It also could be like a bit of if it's a boom bust cycle for feminism, a bit of a boom, right?
Yeah,
That's the way
totally.
the pendulum would go,
Yeah.
maybe. Especially if Trump is back in office, I presume, because there'll be a villain.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier not putting your thumb on the scales except for, maybe capris and some other issues. But it seems like lately The Cut has published at least a few articles about the vice president in this kind of critical moment where, people are floating her name to be the heir apparent if
Yeah.
Biden were to step off the ticket, or the heir apparent if he were to stay on and not make it for 4 years. But you had a few pieces. You had Why Not Kamala, the Rebecca Traister interview with Brittany Cooper. You had conservatives are already attacking Kamala as a DEI hire. And then Is It Time to Take the Coconut Pill, of which, had a collection of kind of memes links. Are you putting your thumb on the scale here? Is The Cut entering the K-Hive?
My thumb is
Don't
in
try
the
to hide from the question, Lindsay. I beg you,
No,
answer this
I don't hide
question.
from the question. I'm not trying to predict too early because honestly, I don't think any of us know what is going to happen with Biden yet. Like, I think that is still to be determined. Every single day there's a new headline about his health. And so I don't think that any of us really honestly do know what is going to happen on this ticket. But I do think that it's really important for The Cut to be at the front and center of how we talk about women in this election. I think we've done so much work in the past with Tracer on abortion being such a big part of this election and people really ignoring it, and how it really just quite frankly pissed us off and felt like people weren't paying attention enough. And so the interesting thing about this job is, like, these are all issues that we've been talking about, writing about for so long, and then now people just start paying attention, obviously because we're nearing the election. But I think that more often than not with this, that I want people to make a concerted effort of why we're doing what we're doing when we go into this election. And so when it comes to, I mean, we had a piece today that Danya Eswasi wrote about how Arab American women feel conflicted about this upcoming election. I think that it's important for us to be the place that is having those really hard conversations, because I do think that people feel really conflicted. And I think people feel really unhappy about the state of the world and where it's going, but don't really feel like we have any options or place to talk about that in a way that feels that we're not shaming or judging anyone, but just feeling like this is not the way in which we want to be in this world.
Yeah, I think one of the things The Cut does really well is like an approach I take when I make a documentary film. It's like an honor their truth approach to the essay or to the story or to the profiles. But I don't know that the culture does that too. I think the culture will react. The culture will still shame.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, just to come back to Kamala, maybe to kind of bring these two threads together. I like, in reading the coverage of Kamala, Brittany's quote about we have to, watch white men be terrible. It put us on the brink of destroying the whole democracy, and then maybe a black woman can help us. And I worry, and I wonder if you think, like, it seems to me that logic of the sort of, I don't know, some of the Cut's coverage of Kamala feels in some ways from the previous moment, and that the kind of, and maybe right left isn't the right way to say it, but the kind of vibe shift that a lot of the other stuff on the Cut embodies is going to make it hard for Kamala Harris. And like, this maybe is a tough moment for her. I'm curious, like, when you sort of pull back, if there's, with your galaxy brain thoughts on that.
Yeah. I don't ever want to make it tough or hard for another woman of color. And obviously, I mean, she's in a tough spot, so that's not ever our intention. But I do think that specifically one thing that we do really well on The Cut is provide critique in a really fair and level way. And especially as a Black woman, I think that a lot of times we shy away from having these conversations because you don't want to publicly talk about another person of color in a way that is critiquing them, and not feel like you can have that critique, but also support at the same time. And so a lot of times I think somebody even like, Professor Brittany Cooper is able to have those conversations in a nuanced way and not trying to make it harder for anyone else. But as a Black woman, you are allowed to.
I mean, I guess I just mean, it's more sort of like we're in this moment of backlash, and a lot of your coverage in some ways is picking up the energy of that backlash. And I guess I do wonder how that'll play out for Kamala.
I mean, for example, like Lindsay, you are already seeing this narrative come out. Imagine what could be unburdened by what has been, and you're going to see those, constant plays.
It's pretty funny.
Can't help, right? But it's very funny. So you're going to see the attack on, and I think you've been covering some of the women that have been writing essays in the pages of the Cut are not necessarily reflected by the progressive women. So does Kamala do well in that world? Does she do less well? I think that's what Ben's kind of getting to.
Yeah, but I think that honestly, people don't really know how to feel about her right now, which is why we're covering it in this way. I think that honestly, people are 100% conflicted and are concerned. I mean, I was concerned before the debate, but I felt like it woke people up in a new dimension after watching the debate and feeling a sense of dread and concern and urgency. And, I mean, social media was crazy for the past couple of days because of that after the debate. And so I don't think that we're trying to sway people in one way or the other. I think that we've been having a lot of these conversations, and obviously now people are just noticing that in a larger way.
Yeah. I do want to pick back up what you're saying, and you don't want to make it harder for a woman of color. And I understand what you're saying there. But I also think, like, as a journalist, of course, you are, I imagine, like, dedicated to pursuing, like, there's not an affirmative action on how you are going to cover Kamala Harris. You are going to cover her, in a dogged way, I imagine.
Of course. But I think that it's not a secret. I mean, a lot of the reporting, investigative journalists, et cetera, aren't usually people of color in the industry. And so when we're doing a story that is about someone who may be controversial or it may have done, accusations, allegations, et cetera, it is a different process when it is another person of color, because I think a lot of times of the Kirby Pyre-Moss story that we did a couple years ago, he's a really well-known Black designer. He's beloved. We knew that there were a lot of allegations, accusations. Most people didn't want to touch it because they felt like it would have to come from the right person, and it would have to come from a person of color in the industry who knew all of these nuances and understanding of him as a designer and as a Black figure who people really looked up to, and understanding that experience. You do just handle it a little bit more delicate, and you don't handle it in a way that you're giving someone favoritism, but you handle it in a way where you understand this is all really important to the culture, but what matters is how fair we cover this in a way that our own conscious of what we are doing is not just to tear somebody down at all, but ever to, I think the reporting on that was really stellar because we were incredibly fair.
I totally agree on that piece, but don't you think that public figures sometimes use that to shut down fair coverage?
100%. But that's why I did the story anyway.
Yeah. I mean, part of the challenge for the vice president would be that the way she was hired into the process, immediately puts a target on her back. And I always hated that moment where, then candidate Biden was like, well, we need a woman who's held state office. It was so specific in terms of the criteria, as opposed to we're going to hire the best person for the job and, find out that it's Kamala Harris. And people could speculate on the dynamics, but to make them explicit in the way that they were made, I think is gonna be that media narrative will already be out there on the right, and is.
Yeah. That was a conversation we had when we did Stacey Abrams on the cover. That was a conversation we had a while ago. So this is, it's not a new one, but I think it's a resurrected conversation that now I think obviously there's a sense of urgency around.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for being with us.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you, guys.